There's something I've been mulling this over, trying to put my thoughts together, and it kept not coming out quite right. Something would always kind of come out wrong, and I'm like, no, that's not it. And I was like, I think I kind of need something more for perspective on this, and then it took a little bit to congeal. But what in thinking about the whole triad of Machiavellianism, sociopathy, and what was it? Narcissism. Because what it was that at a certain point, I had to, really evaluate how much was going on in my mind along those lines, and there was just, and so this being something that are traits that when studied, they repeatedly keep showing up as something that usually in the Western political spectrum is associated with the left of center. And so now something more has come up, is that there was a survey it was Revolver, I think, had a story on it, or linked it, that it was this study on would you respond with violence to these, and that violence was not being committed against you. You were hearing or being made aware of some idea, and that is violence then called for against this person, or okay? And that once again, the more left of center, the more likely that they were fine with political violence, and that the history of the United States really, especially since the 60s and on, have shown this is actually what the overwhelming evidence has been. There's these characters who pop up as politically right-wing, who were these various, there would be the white nationalists and stuff who blow up this or do that. But when you actually start going through like all the many incidences, really the left beats the right every time. I mean, by by many more incidences, like by orders, because the left actually has the journalists on their side to never report, especially the bombings. Leftists, and especially in the form of unionists, but the left are really into bombing things, and that society will fold. That's the reason why trans people are not insane anymore, is because of bomb threats to psychiatrists and psychologists, until they got the doctors they wanted to say that they weren't crazy. And people might disagree, but if they look it up long enough, they'll end up finding the stories, and they'll be like, that's pretty much almost what it came down to. And there's a bunch of people who are like, oh, but the revolution requires this. And so then I started thinking about that, the revolution. And it was something that this never comes up, because so few people, once you know about it, you just kind of forget that it's something people don't tend to know about. That most of what we think of as the revolution of that, like the post-Enlightenment and the Enlightenment revolutions, most of these they're just not from the bottom up. Like even the Peasants' Revolt of Britain was from a group somewhere in the middle who motivated a bunch of people at the bottom and planned it all. And it just, after a while, like, so people, especially who are into intelligence work and the history of that kind of stuff, end up finding out, like, yeah, actually this is pretty consistent, that the story becomes that this was a widely popular effort by all these people, because people like that story. But then when you look further into it, you end up finding out, like, no, this was agitated by the middle of society, because the upper part of society was really ripping them off at that stage. And so they were going to topple the corrupt top of society. And I mean, even our revolution, it was a little bit more honestly, about that. But but also, and that in the whole idea of property rights, and that they're like, we don't really have property rights, and so you guys are ripping us off, like the king is ripping us off, and so it's a bit even more frank and more honest about the interests of people, and connects the idea of one's worldly interests really that there's also these fundamental ideas about individualism and your agreement of your relationship with the state and such, that all came together and that's why ours is better. The French are on their fifth government, ours is better. So anyway, so as I started really thinking about oh yeah, people don't know that the revolution always comes really from the middle. It's a top-down thing, because one of the first places in conspiracies is the Illuminati, which is actually one of the most important historical oddities that you actually get to hear about, how a group of thinkers all got together and were exchanging ideas at a time that exchanging ideas was absolutely verboten, or these types of ideas. And so people don't understanding the Illuminati Lodge is very important just for history's sake, because of even the story of how we even know they exist is amazing. I mean, everybody who knows, how do we have all their documents? How do we know who they were? It's an amazing story. A guy got hit by lightning, and that's how we have all their documents. And this is totally absolutely real thing. There's great research on it. You end up finding some of the greatest minds in the German Empire at that time, German Empire at that time were a part of it. And because of the way that the legal structure was, it just people just had to leave the area, and then nobody could touch them. And also, these were a very large portion of the justices at that time in Germany. And heads of universities, and Mozart, his dad, or his dad, actually, not him, but his dad. So it's a very fascinating, just historical issue, that without groups like this, you could not have had the formation of even the very concept of individual liberties, the idea of any kind of equality, before the law, or anything like that. The idea that it's necessary to spread literacy, really the fundamental concept that slavery is wrong, is actually something that has a lot to do with a lot of the Freemasonic rituals and various, and so people who know about it end up knowing about it, and they just, but it's one of these things that people on the right, we got into kind of getting into the weeds of how did we get here? What really is the story? And so more and more, what's been fascinating is to see that the left is now just sort of spiraling into the madness of subjective truth, and a lot of this thing of being narcissistic, Machiavellian, and sociopathic, to the point that now San Francisco has lost, I think, a fifth of its population in 2 years, if I remember correctly. The collapse of San Francisco is such that, and now other places on the West Coast, businesses, the resulting financial services for those businesses, such as insurance and bookkeeping, all the things like plant maintenance, for HVAC and electricity and all of this stuff. Without that talent being demanded, you have less and less reason for somebody to do it. And then what you really end up needing is the government to not tax it such that it's incentivized to do these things that maintain society and kind of keep normal commerce going. More and more, because of the narcissistic nature of a lot of the leadership on the Democratic Party side, I'm highly doubting this, because it's sort of these constant monorail, but we could just build a monorail. But no, believe in monorail. Monorail is the future. And if we just invest in more monorail laboratories, we can finally make monorail work. Whoa. Okay. See, that's why you need a monorail. And with that, I'm out.